You're listening to Edge Radio TV. The views and opinions expressed in this program are that of the hosts or guests, and not the Edge Radio Network or its advertisers or affiliates.
E.R.A.S.E is an organization. It's a movement. We're talking about unity. We're talking about unity. So we're aimed to taking down the system of race by educating, enlightening, informing, and positively debating with those who have counterviews.
And welcome to Edge Radio's Talk About Unity. I'm Carlin Charleston, the Executive Director of E.R.A.S.E, and I want to welcome you to this week's show. And we've got a good one for you today. I just really got pumped up by the music that I just heard in the intro music, and I got to make sure everybody's getting that. For some reason, he's not getting my connection. All right, so, but hey, today's topic is we're going to take a critical look at critical race theory, and boy, it's going to be an exciting show today. We've got our guest from Indianapolis coming in, and we're going to talk about that later. But first of all, before I do that, I want to talk about my trusty co-host and stalwart companion and friend, Mr. Richard Jennings. What's up, Richard? What's happening?
Man, I tell you, there's so much going on in the news right now, in the world right now. Hey, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. I'm just saying. But there's some stuff going on. There's some hating going on in Jacksonville right now. There's a lot of football analysts, pundits, talk show hosts, celebrities, and players and public that are just hating on Tim Tebow trying to be a tight end under Urban Meyer. And they're
what's
saying,
the hate about?
The hate is
it's Tim Tebow. What you got to hate about Tim Tebow?
There's a lot of people that love Tim Tebow. There's a lot of people that really weren't a fan because of him kneeling down and just he talked. He definitely had religion on his sleeve a lot, and that was obnoxious
hating
to
on
some
Jesus.
people. I love Tim Tebow, by the way. I'm just go ahead and full disclosure on that.
All right.
But so here's the rub. There's a lot of people that feel like Colin Kaepernick didn't get his fair shot, and they're like, well, how does Tim get his shot, but Colin didn't get his? Well, that's an argument for the ages, right?
I didn't get mine. What happened to mine?
You
I didn't get mine. I should have gotten my shot. They didn't give me a shot.
They just didn't know who you were.
Yeah.
But okay,
they said you're too short.
So here's the deal about Colin. I mean, not Colin. Well, we can talk about Colin later. Here's the deal about Tim. You know, he played for Urban as a Florida Gator, and they Tim in 07 won the Heisman. In 08, they They won the BCS. They won it. They won the whole enchilada. They were number one in the nation. And then in 09, the next year, they were 13-1. So Urban wants to build some confidence around him. He wants to have some people on his team that his nose got his back. And you know what? Winning is contagious. So anyway, so there's that. Hopefully they'll get it figured out. But he definitely signed the contract to play as tight end, and there were several tight ends in the league. They have like a tight end club. Did you even know this? Have a tight end club. And so basically, they invited Tim to be a part of the tight end club. But he's still got to make the team. If he didn't make the team, he didn't make any money. If he gets hurt, he loses half of his salary. So really, the risk is all on him, none on Urban and the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm just saying this to anybody that doesn't like this thing with Tim. Here's the deal. Let Urban be the coach. Let him win or lose, pass or fail, get fired or stay hired on his own merit. He wants Tim, let him have Tim. Tim could be a cheerleader as far as I'm concerned. Is he going to help the Jacksonville Jaguars win? That's awesome.
So we changed our topic to critical football theory today. And so we got a little different discussion that's happening now. All right. So
here's the other one real quick.
You got about 10 seconds because we got George Middleton in today. We got George Middleton. You got to go.
Back in debate. They're saying now they're going back to its bats or it was lab created. Okay, last one. People in the medical community's jobs.
No, that's a big one, though. All right, but we got to keep moving. But the Wuhan Yeah, that's amazing. Though they're
went
going
to
back and
about
saying
bats, and now they're
I
saying
said
it
all
could be
I said the whole time
lab-created.
Fauci is in this thing deep.
Yeah,
I said it. I
deep.
said it. You know, Fauci is in this thing deep. Oh, but go ahead.
Okay, here goes real quick. People in the medical communities, their jobs are being threatened because they are forced to get the vaccine. If not, they will be terminated. So remember, it is not FDA approved. It is there's no legal or criminal, civil or criminal recourse against pharmaceutical companies. So there's a lot of people that feel like they are going to lose their job unjustly because of a vaccine that isn't even really a vaccine. So that is hitting right now.
That's the question for this year. Is going to be: are you fully vaccinated? Are you fully vaccinated? You're special. Are you fully vaccinated?
No.
Oh, that's crazy.
All
All
right,
right.
you got to get a booster in. Then you
Hey, let's get rolling because I got a lot. We got stuff to cover even before we get to our
Yes.
first break. Because
Come
first
on.
thing we want to do is we got our resident race deconstructionist, Mr. George Milton, in the house. We want to go ahead and bring George in so we can get this thing moving.
Come
on
on.
critical race theory, taking a critical look. Welcome, George. Come on in, brother. Welcome.
Yes.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Carlin and Richard. What's going
Man,
on, guys?
You here? We
Glad
got
to
lots
see
to
you.
cover, but man, yeah, we're just glad to have you in here because we want to get this thing kicked off. And so, hey, before we go, because normally we just chat for a little while and we get the news all updated and we talk about the stuff that we talk about Wuhan for 10 minutes if we wanted to.
Right.
But we don't have that time today because every time we have George Middleton, what happens? We run out of time and we say we got to bring him back. So George is actually, he's going to be the third co-host on the show. No, he's going. So I guess you call it a tri-host or something. I don't know. But anyway, all right. So here's what we're going to do. All right. So I want to get right into this. We're going to play this opening clip about critical race theory as a departure point for us to kick off our discussion. So if you could let everybody just listen up, and we're going to play this for it's about 2 minutes long, and then we'll have some discussion and we'll get it kicked off. George. All right. Here we go.
That's good.
Educators across the country are rethinking how we address race and its impact on all areas of society in the classroom. One of the tools is critical race theory, but the topic has also turned many schools into battlegrounds over culture, race, identity, and history. Several states like Rhode Island and Missouri are considering bills that would stop schools from teaching more about concepts like sexism and racism. Joining us now to talk more about this is Okikor E.R.A.S.E. She is an anti-racist organizer and steering committee member for Black Lives Matter at school. Okikor, welcome. So great to have you with us. We are hearing the phrase critical race theory a lot these days, but I would venture that most people don't truly understand what it is. Can you explain what it is exactly?
Yes, hi. Thank you again for inviting me. Okikor here. And critical race theory is something that came out of legal studies scholarship. It was originally not an education-based concept. It wasn't something that educators initially used. It came out of the legal studies. And critical race theory is a lens. It's just pretty much a lens that people use to analyze the ways that the legal system, our institutions, impact the lives of those who are people of color, who these laws were not initially meant for. But when we hear a lot about critical race studies right now, critical race theory, it's not something that is taught in schools. Like, people are thinking that this is something that's taught in schools. It really is a lens. It's a critical lens for how we examine these institutions and the laws and the ways that they impact people's lives.
Okay, that's enough of that. So, George, based on what she was saying as part of the definition, do you think she covered that well enough, or is there something that's missing there that you would add?
That's so far as the most accurate and non-ideological perspective on the assessment going on today. But she covered that very, very effectively and very succinctly.
Okay. The other thing is the commentator talked about how CRT had turned schools into battlegrounds over what should be taught, and that several states we find now are initiating bills in their state governments banning that subject matter be included in their classrooms. What are they really talking about should be banned? What are they because I think you've talked about before that they don't really know what they're talking about. And I sent you an article about how they're saying that certain people are ignorant about what critical race theory is. What are they actually talking about when they talk about some of that subject matter being banned in classrooms?
So first of all, and I'm only mentioning this because of the ideological nature of the states that are pushing this. Unfortunately, there's a partisan connection to this push, which is cloud objectivity of everybody in trying to discuss the issue. The states that are pushing this ban for quote unquote CRT are red states. And they are using elements of race ideology and I don't know if they're pretending or substituting it as critical race theory. But what they're wanting to do is keep race the same by not addressing the source. So to address the theory, which is, as the video that you played earlier said, it's just a lens looking through what race has already created. They want to attack critical race theory, which is the actual introspection, which is the actual study of the impact of race, so they can feel like they've addressed a racial issue, but they really haven't. They've just confused it more.
Okay, it's pretty interesting because eventually we're going to cover some of the tenets that are identified from critical race theorists. Would you say that the critical race theorists and the things that if you go back, and we'll talk about that also later, the founders, do you say that we're talking about in critical race theory today is the same critical race theory that the founders created back in the late 70s, 80s? Is that the same thing? Are we talking about? Here's the deal. We're gonna take a break here. We're gonna hold that one right there, George, because we're gonna take a break. When we come back from the break, then we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about these key tenets and what we're actually talking about today as compared to historical critical race theory. And so we'll kind of start with the foundation there, but we'll do that right as soon as we come back from this break on Talk About Unity, Critical Race Theory.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
Don't push me because I'm close to the edge.
I'm trying not to lose my head.
Hey, this is the Talk About Unity show where I bring the talk.
And I bring the unity.
And together we talk about unity. Unity is what matters.
Come on.
And right now in our country, that's what we've got to do. So we do that here at Talk About Unity on the Edge Radio Network. Be with us every week.
It's going to be awesome. It always is. And I tell you what, the more we seek first to understand, then be understood, we make progress.
And we like to do that. And that's why everybody's on the brink. We love what we do at Edge Radio because everybody's on the edge. We bring them back from the edge and we bring the unity. So we're just glad to Edge Radio Network every Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. Talk about unity because here at Edge Radio Network, truth still matters.
Edge Radio TV is holding auditions for new show hosts. Are you a subject matter expert, professional, influencer, book author, thought leader, or business owner with an educational or motivational platform? Then we want to meet you. Send a link of some of your work to edgeradio20@gmail.com and be sure to put audition in the subject line. Join the Edge Radio TV family. Edge TV, because truth still matters.
parents had the courage to say this publicly a few days ago at a school board meeting. Watch.
CRT is not an honest dialogue. It is a tactic that was used by Hitler and the Ku Klux Klan on slavery very many years ago to dumb down my ancestors so we could not think for ourselves. CRT is racist. It is abusive. It discriminates against one's color. Let me educate you. An honest dialogue does not oppress. An honest dialogue does not implement hatred or injustice. It's to communicate without deceiving people. Today, we don't need your agreement. We want action and a backbone for what we asked for today, to ban CRT. I had to come down here today to tell you to your face that we are coming together and we are strong. This will not be the last. Greet and meet respectfully.
Hey, we're back. Welcome back to today's show as we take a critical look at critical race theory. And as you saw that parent there in that clip, she was very upset. And George, I want to ask you that question. Do these parents have a good reason to be upset about this issue? Was she rightfully right to be upset on this case?
Well, remember, this issue with CRT is conflated with partisan motivation. Very unfortunate. So there's a few indicators to always look for when someone is speaking on any issue. First of all, just the emotion. The emotion was far over the top for the issue. Secondly, it was completely not factual. Nothing she said about CRT. The very first video was even-tempered, it was objective, and it was factual. And it just got right to the point of what the issue is. This one is a dead giveaway. There's a motive behind it. There's an agenda behind it because the over-the-top emotion for what? You know, if you have people coming in and they're willing to discuss, no one was yelling, no one was screaming, so there's no reason for that. So what's the use for that level of emotion except to try to lure people caught up in an emotional fervor so that you can control them. And you really, that's what's going on in our world today. People are using emotion to get their own needs met. And then she said, we are something about we. Who was we? That's a very important question to get the answer to, because this is not just your typical soccer mom who's upset about CRT. First of all, she's too emotional. Second of all, she's totally incorrect in her facts. Third of all, when she says we, that is something that everybody really needs to get down to the nitty gritty with.
Great, George. Great response. And here we go. You know, today we want the show to be I call it the definitive show on critical race theory. So we want to really start from the very bottom so that we can define these terms. And George, being our resident race deconstructionist, he's also our resident therapist. And so you can hear the way he asks these questions. He's so smooth and he analyzes everybody. He'll do that with me. And I go, George, don't analyze me. But he does that. That's what he does. And so he's good at what he does. And so, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the origin of CRT and where it came from. And we've got this statement on CRT from Wikipedia. And so consider the source. And I wanted you put that graphic up that displays that. And it says here that critical race theory emerged as a movement in the 1980s, reworking theories of critical legal studies with more focus on race. Both critical race theory and critical legal studies are rooted in critical theory, which argues that social problems are influenced and created more by societal structures and cultural assumptions than by individual and psychological factors. So George, one of the beefs that most people have with critical race theory is, in fact, its foundation in critical legal studies, because of course critical legal studies emerged out of, people say, Marxism. And so that's what critical legal studies emerged from. And so people then extrapolate that into critical race theory. Is that appropriate or is that not?
I think it's overreaction. Again, Marxism, communism, socialism, all those things, people just try to drag in everything to color the issue rather than taking a structured, methodical, and objective approach. Just because something might be maybe connected to something that you either agree or disagree with doesn't mean that it's not true or not effective. So again, once you get into a moralistic who's right, who's wrong, sin versus evil, and good do-gooders and all that. You're on a whole different discussion, and you're mixing too many things in, and you'll never make any movement forward. 10 years from now, you're going to have this same discussion.
I want to ask you this question, because one of the things that I noticed that, and as I was researching this, and I've been looking at this critical race theory now for a couple of years, that one of the founders, Derek Bell, who many call him the father of critical race theory, he made this statement about America being irredeemably racist. And that is kind of the premise that most people associate with critical race theory. So I want to ask you, and so that's why people make that association with Marxism, because in Marxism, there was always the oppressor and the oppressed. And so that seems to be the theme that runs through critical race theory, or critical race theorists, that they had that same idea that America, because of its irredeemably racist, then there are racists who oppress, and then there are those victims who are the oppressed, and you got the oppressor and the oppressed. Mm-hmm. So you got that dynamic. So how does that apply or not apply, in your view, to critical race theory, George?
Well, first I would say I understand where he's coming from, but I would disagree with him.
With that, Derek Bell, are you talking about Derek Bell, the founder?
I would disagree with Derek Bell's premise that America is irredeemably racist. I would disagree with that. But I understand where he's coming from, and it comes from a flawed concept that, even though, which is the irony of critical race theory, even though the premise of critical race theory is that race is a social construct, they are still operating within the paradigm of race. So when he makes that statement, he's making that statement as a person of whichever racial identity he ascribes to. And when you begin with race as your identity, then you are inevitably confined to the fact that if race is your identity, then racism and racist is something that you will always have to deal with. And so he's coming from that very fatalistic perspective, because race, racist, and racism are inextricably tied. Whether you intend to or not, the minute you begin with a racial identity, everything else is included.
So I think that point that you just made right there, we're probably going to cover that 2 or 3 different times the rest of this show. And so I want to say that again, just so the listeners can hear what you were saying, that you drew the distinction clearly in your discussion just then, George, between critical race theory and the premise upon which it is built, and the idea of race or racial ideology. You kind of made a distinction there that I think most people miss out on. And so, right. And so would I be correct then, based on what you're saying, George, and assuming that you're saying that critical race theory is flawed because it is rooted in racial ideology?
The intention of critical race theory is admirable. So that is, I don't have an issue with that. Where it needs to be perfected is to learn to separate itself from the very social construct that it's saying it's based on. So meaning, if you know that race is a social construct and it has these deleterious impacts on our systemic structures, then go the next step further. But they're not going that step further because they're operating from a racial identity, and that racial identity says that there's nothing we can do about it. Yeah. Because I'm this racial identity, these are the impacts that I'm forever under the impacts of, because we can't change. We are our skin color, and that's just the way it's going to be.
Hey, George, Carlin sent me an article that was entitled "White People's Fear of Critical Race Theory is Based in Ignorance" by Allison Gaines. There was a statement that I believe was directed at people that they look like me. We'll just say that. So, some white people rather make critical race theory into the boogeyman, and white people who fear critical race theory are using deflection 101. They will do anything to distract from their role in maintaining white supremacy. So here's a question. What is this overarching theme of white supremacy, and why is it assumed that all whites have it? Like, oh my God, it's like a disease. I have it.
The overarching theme of white supremacy is exactly what race ideology is.
Whoa! Say that again, George. Say that again. I like that. Say that again.
Yeah. The overall theme of white supremacy is exactly what race ideology is. Yeah. And unfortunately, white supremacy has been given a stigma that gets in the way of the objectivity of the concept. White supremacy is referring to the hierarchical position in the racial spectrum. White is on top, supreme. Black is on bottom, inferior, from an objective standpoint. So that means all access, all rights, any benefits, any privileges, first go to who's on top, who is supreme. And that's what that means. That's just simply what it means. So when you take on an identity of color, whether it's black or white, whether you intend to or not, and this is the reality, because when people are talking about race today, they don't realize they're talking about race ideology. Yeah. They think they're just talking about skin color. Oh, brother, you're my brother. I don't care what color you are. That's not the issue we're discussing here. We're talking about the belief of what that color means. That's where we're not having a conversation on that level. And in race ideology, white's on top, black's on bottom. And all rights, access, privileges, punishments go accordingly.
That's why we've got the definitive show today on critical race theory. That's our resident race deconstructionist, George Middleton, and with dropping a lot of great knowledge for us today. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to cover the tenets of critical race theory, and we're going to take a deeper dive into what we're talking about already. So thanks, George, and we'll be right back after this.
Hey y'all, I'm Robin B.
And I'm Dr. Kiva.
And we just want to know
how you living.
Join us every Monday
at noon Central Standard Time
here on Edge Radio TV. Take care.
When people stop talking to each other, society is on the edge. Let's bring them back. Edge Radio, because truth still matters.
And we're back here at today's definitive show on critical race theory. We've got our resident race deconstructionist, George Milton, out of Indianapolis, Indiana, and he's on the show today. He's dropping great knowledge. If you didn't get the first part, you need to go back and rewind and hear all of it.
You gotta get it.
Play it 2 or 3 times, all right? So get the replay. All right, but now we're getting ready to go where the rubber meets the road. We're going to talk about the tenets of critical race theory. And, of course, and one of the things that's going to be clear, I think, from this, George, is that, you know, there are people who, I think there's a contemporary CRT, and then there's the CRT that was originally founded. And so some of these tenets might not be the tenets, but I've got 5 tenets here that we're going to cover in the rest of today's show. And so let's just go ahead and start out by taking each one of these, and then we'll discuss them. And you'll hear George dropping some more knowledge. All right? So here we go. Tenet number 1. Critical race theory recognizes race as a social construct developed by white colonists rather than as a biological function. We are all one race, the human race. The subsequent laws of enslavement and segregation derive from a false theory of white supremacy. So let's look at the first part of that tenet that just simply says that critical race theory recognizes race as a social construct. George, what do you say? That sounds great to me, and I believe that's true, and we agree totally on that, I believe. What do you say, George?
So again, it's about the wording. If you don't mind putting that description back up again, so we could just have the viewers look at the wording, because the words are very, very powerful and very influential. Could we put that up?
Put that
slide back up.
Yep, we got it.
Critical race theory recognizes race as a social construct. Stop. I mean, really understand that, because it's going to have impact on everything else that's being said after that. Developed by white colonists. What's wrong with those next 4 words? What's wrong with those next 4 words?
You're using race ideology to define it. You know,
right.
Like so, white colonists. You had to have something to define what's a white colonist if you're coming up with a theory about race.
The more accurate and correct version is developed by European colonists who created white and black. And it's important to understand that both white and black are racial labels of color.
Mm-hmm.
And that adds to the confusion today when we have this discussion, because many people who identify as white don't consider themselves as a race. They only look at those who identify as black from a racial perspective, because white doesn't have to be said. White is in the institution. It's what everything has been based around. So you don't have to say it.
Although they have to check a box just like black people do. When they got a census form, when they go to the doctor, they all have to check the box. Does that not then force them into accepting themselves as part of the racial paradigm?
And that's how it's designed to be. So the reality is that white is just as fictitious a label as black, especially if you have to check a box. But we do mind tricks with our racial labels. And we treat it as normal, and it's entirely abnormal and dysfunctional. So then when we try to have a discussion, if I'm coming from a black perspective and Richard's coming from a white perspective, then we're going to miss a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I'm only coming from the black. I haven't lived Richard's experience. Richard hasn't lived mine, but we both have experienced the same thing. But because I've got a different pair of glasses on, I'm going to see it differently than Richard, which that's how it's designed. So then we will never meet in the middle, most likely, because he's entrenched in his white perspective and I'm entrenched in my black perspective.
And so are there people, and this is the question I think that Richard was asking earlier, are there people who grow up and never have one of those lenses, but instead have a lens that doesn't allow them to see either one of those things? So, and I hate to use that word colorblind because they made that such a bad word now these days, but are there people who grow up, and what do you think? I mean, if there are, how does that happen, and what percentage of the population do you think they represent? Are there people who grow up without those lenses?
The cultures that most closely come to that are those that are born outside of the United States, because race is a global phenomenon. But America is the only place where there's no cultural origination here. It's all racially originated. And cultures come here to assimilate into one of the racial boxes. But those who come here have a better filter because they have a more cultural filter as their originating source. And they understand race from a more cerebral, external perspective and not from an internal identity perspective. Here in America, if you're born here, white or black, you understand race as an internal. It is the essence of who you believe that you are.
So what do you think is how prolific are those people? Like I said, not just people who come from immigrants who come from outside, but I'm still trying to get to this question of people. I say people like me. How can people grow up without this racial lens? Which I think I did. And what would you say about that, George? George, would you say Carlin grew up with no racial lens, or is he demented?
Carlin, you are in transition. Okay. First of all, this is objectively speaking. First of all, you are very aware that there's something not right here with this whole race thing. And before I answer that question, the other part of that slide is, and Carlin, you and I have had this conversation before. Humans are not a race, and the critical theory card you had up, I don't know if that was an actual CRT tenet that said we are all one race, the human race. I haven't seen any critical race theory description so far in all my research refer to we're all one race, the human race. Race is a social construct, period. So you can't say critical race theory recognizes race as a social construct and then in the very same breath say we're all one race. That's just not logical at all. So,
is that because race is not logical? Because I mean, if you look at any of the today's contemporary what I call critical race theorists, such as Kendi, Ibram X. Kendi, he would say that. You would find him saying that. Would you call him a critical race theorist? And would you say?
I've never heard Kendi refer to himself as a critical race theorist. So that would be a new one on me. Mm-hmm. But I'm operating off of the definition that the first video you played states, because it's very objective and it's very to the point. It's a study on the ideology of race and how it impacts our legal systems and institutions.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go deeper. Let's take a deeper dive. Let's go to tenet number 2, and let's see if there's anything there that we think might clear this up some. And here's the idea or the thought. It says that racism is normal, not aberrational. All right. So what are they saying there, George? And do you find this to be a valid tenet of critical race theory?
I have never seen it worded that way so far. Again, in my studies on this topic,
maybe this one, because I think this is the same one that you also hear, where it's America is systemically racist. That's the same statement they're making here.
Yeah. It would say that I think it's a version of what it says. Critical race theorists hold that the law and legal institutions in the United States are inherently racist insofar as they function to create and maintain social, economic, and political inequalities between whites and non-whites, especially African Americans. So that one statement that you had could kind of be paraphrased to represent the more lengthy statement that I just read.
And so do you?
So that's the tenet of CRT, is that because it operates on the ideology of race, the social construct, that means that ideology is inherent in all the systems and policies that are developed resulting from that, which makes it inherently racist. And I would say there's a lot of statistical studies that would support that statement.
Okay, so in reality, what they're basically saying when they say racism is normal, not aberrational, you're going to have fewer instances where you have institutions that are quote unquote non-racist or not racist. That the norm is that we are going to have institutions infused with this idea of racism. And of course, we would start with the idea that, well, you've got race ideology, and so you're not sure how much of that or where racism is in that thing, because you're saying race ideology plays a huge part in this. And so, is that what we would say?
Right. Race is an ideology. That it's nothing else other than an ideology. The minute and little kids know this from the age of 3. The minute that they're told they are a certain color, they know what that means instinctively. And there's a lot of studies out that support that. I mean, think about it. Name one system that is not on any level impacted by race here in this country. Name something.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit. Say that again, George. One system that is
name one system that on any level is not impacted by race.
Not impacted by what?
Race.
By race?
By race ideology.
Oh.
Name one system. Sports?
Well, when you say impacted, so you got, well, I think you got varying levels of impact though, because I could look at certain institutions and say, well, it was more impacted and now it's less impacted. So
okay, so again, I don't want to have that kind of that type of discussion. Just let's keep it simple. Like Richard said sports. So he believes. And Richard, why do you say sports is not impacted by race?
Well, I think it was impacted, but as people were able to be promoted, paid, be successful based on their talents and abilities and their character and their ability to perform well in that particular game or sport, that's where the rewards were. People got fired. They sat on the bench because they were a horrible player. It had nothing to do with whether they were black or white. I mean, think about whether it's running backs or receivers or quarterbacks or anything. There's not this particular position is held by a Mexican or a white person or a black person. There's across the spectrum, whether it's coaches, whether it's now we're moving into the front office. I don't think there's an owner in professional. No. In basketball, there are owners of African American owners in certain sports, but I think the front office is probably the last thing to catch up. But as far as the players and management and coaches, we're seeing a pretty even playing field.
So wait, before you answer that, George, we got to take a break, and so hold that, George. Get your answer ready, and you're seating. We're gonna take another break, and then we'll be right back, and we'll deal with that on Critical Race Theory here.
When people stop talking to each other, society is on the edge. Let's bring them back. Edge Radio, because truth still matters.
We're back, and I cut George off before he could answer that last question. He's looking for an institution that has not been affected by race. We're here on the definitive show on critical race theory today, here on Talk About Unity, and we've got George Middleton in the house. And so Richard was telling him that sports is an area that where it's been meritocracy. You know, it's been a meritocracy. Everybody does their best, and they play or they don't play. And so I think he's talking about the players. And so he kind of talked about the ownership. But anyway, George was about to dig in on that. So, George, you got about 30 seconds, and we got to move on because we're going to hit the last three tenets on the rest of the show. So go ahead, George. Take it away.
Yes, Richard, I appreciate your honesty on the answer. If you go back and replay and listen to your answer, you'll find that it's not as not involved as you started out by saying. The fact that you still had to say, well, in some places it's still catching up, tells you that race still has an impact on sports in general. More specifically, there is a class settlement on the NFL concussion scandal. You've heard about that? Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay. And the NFL concussion settlement is addressing the practice of race norming, which assumes this is what the NFL currently is doing, even though I won't admit it, but it's out in the lawsuit. The practice of race norming, which assumes a lower cognitive baseline for Black players and thus makes it harder for them to show cognitive impairment in cases of concussion loss. And so when retired players try to go and get monies that are allocated for that, they use race norming to distribute whatever that damage would be, and the Black player is going to end up on the lower end, if anything, because it's already assumed because of his skin color that he has lower cognitive ability.
Yeah,
check it out, guys.
Wow.
And that sports is not the only system where race is being used in a systemic way.
Right. Okay, great. Hey, and during the break, I told George, I said, I only know one system or institution that's not affected by race, and that's my house. And so that might be very true. All right. But let's go on. Let's get to some more of these tenets. We got 3 more to cover.
Hey, that was it. Real quick. George, that was a great answer. Thank you, George.
Yeah, good.
You're very welcome.
George said all my answers are great. All right, here we go. So let's go. This third tenet, it says, and this is called interest convergence. I'm going to kind of cover this because we got the definition up there. But interest convergence basically says that things only happen in the interest of quote unquote Black people when quote unquote white people can benefit. All right, so that's what it's saying. There's no good that's done except that it benefits the quote unquote white power structure. And so what do you think about that as a tenet of critical race theory, George?
Objectively true. Unfortunately, it reads very divisive. And I wish there was a way to get around that. Again, using these terms, Black people and white people. Mm-hmm. It just entrenches what's already in our subconscious, this divisionary component that makes it hard to look at the objective truth. Okay, because we are not the people that's listed on that card. And so for me, it's easier to do it because I've already objectivized myself out of the racial paradigm. But for those who are still maintaining a racial identity, it's very hard to keep that objectivity, because if you identify as white, it's a good chance you're going to be offended at that. And you're going to feel like someone's accusing you of being against the interests of Black people. And there's probably not even the faintest thought on your mind, right? But it comes with white identity. The minute you take a racial identity, either way, all of that comes with it. You can't separate yourself.
Great, George. All right, let's go. Fourth tenet. Here we go. The fourth tenet is intersectionality. And this is a big one, all right? And here's the thing, George. I want you to really do your therapeutic thing on this one, George, because this one says this is the theory that hypothesizes that individuals cannot be placed into a single identifying box. All right. Now that sounds like a huge contradiction for them to say, have a tenet that says we can't place people in a box when in fact you're using race, which in fact does exactly that. I just find that just to be so contradictory. What do you say, George?
Very good observation, Carlin. Very good observation. I mean, and that's that is my critique of how critical race theory is worded, because I know its intent, but its wording kind of steps on itself and gets people. It gives room for those who want to use critical race theory. It gives it a wide open avenue to be misused because it's using some of the very concepts that it's really trying to study and figure out a way to address, because it doesn't know. Critical race theory has a theory about it, but it has no way of come up with a solution to counteract it or address it. And so, as you said, Carlin, you really answered it for me. The fact of using a box like race is the problem. We all are a mix of all of our experiences, all of our knowledge, all of the good things that have happened to us, all of the bad things that happen to us. So none of us are just one singular thing. But that's exactly what race tries to do, is make you one singular thing.
And I think that's the point I think about all of this as we talk about it, and we talk about our definitive show on critical race theory. I think the key part is the critical, and that's what I think that you bring to the game, George, that most people don't understand, that that's what needs to happen. And that is we need to begin thinking more critically about some of these theories. And I hate to say that because it sounds so redundant, but that's really what needs to happen. And I think that's what you do, and because you're trained in that, George, and I think you do that more easily. And so that's why he's going about, and I'm going to make sure that George's message of race deconstruction gets promulgated throughout the land, because that's what we're going to do, because that's what has to happen. I mean, it sounds self-serving because, I'm doing erase racing because George is doing that, but it's what's got to happen, because there are few people who think on this level. They don't. I mean, and there are fights out there about race and about what happens to black people, what white people are doing, and about white supremacy and white racism and all this. All that stuff is happening, but man, this is what needs to happen. So, all right, we got one more to cover, and we got 3 minutes to do it, George. And so let's cover this last one, and it's this idea of centering. Now, I don't want to go through all of that, so I won't read all of that. But centering simply is this idea that only that you have to be a black person to speak on black men's specific needs and experiences. You have to be a white person to speak on white person's issues. All right. And so the idea here is that we need to start listening more to these people than those people. We've only been hearing from white people, so we only need to hear now from black people. So that's this idea of centering. So tell us about that one, George, and we got about 2 minutes before we close out the show. So we might not get enough time. And as we always say, we're going to need more time with George. Okay.
You say the best one last, because there's so many ways that you can go on with the direction of this last tenet that you showed. But from strictly a therapeutic perspective, and that is the least therapeutic view that you can take in terms of trying to come to a solution. What that's really saying is that regardless of what identity you take, you don't have the ability of empathy and sympathy for the other perspective. And in many ways, white and black was designed to really obfuscate that ability to see the other side. For me to say, okay, white man, let me see what it's like from your perspective. And okay, black man, and let me see what it's. Not that it never happens, but it happens very rarely. And it's really difficult if you haven't lived the experience associated with either of those racial identities, because people who identify as black have a very unrealistic perspective of what it means to live as a white person, and vice versa. We're all going based on stereotypes of what we think it means, and we have no actual idea. Those that may come somewhere close are those who are blessed or cursed to be considered two racial makeups, because they kind of live in both worlds. But that's as close as you can come. But what that tenet is saying is that empathy be damned, sympathy be damned, understanding be damned. Unless you have had exactly what I've had, you have no bearing to speak on this issue, which feeds into the hopelessness of race ideology. Because that means, well, if I can't speak and you can't speak, all I can do is talk about what I know, and all you can do is talk about what you know, then nobody's moving forward.
That is beautiful there, George Middleton. That's George Middleton, our resident race deconstructionist. Outstanding. That's a great way to close the program. You need a standing ovation for that because, he articulated it very clearly there. Beautiful. It's the idea that we can't care for each other unless we happen to have the same skin color. That's got to be ridiculous. Yep. All right. So George said it in a much more educated manner than I'm able to articulate, and that's why I hang with George. Okay. So we want to thank you for being here, George Middleton. We appreciate you. And we'll let Richard close out our show. We're out of time. Thanks, though, George, for being here today.
One sentence. We need to move more and more away from critical race theory, although there's some great concepts there. We need to move more towards critical character theory, where we're talking more about character than the color of our skin. So anyway, man, I so like talking to George. Thank you, sir.
Awesome, George. You should cue the music. We're out. This is Talk About Unity here on Edge Radio TV Network, where the truth still matters. Critical race theory. We got critical today. Thank you, George, and we're out.